good morning, everyone. I think there's still quite a few people entering the session, but we will start to kick off here just now. My name is Britta Wyatt. I am a member of the Aspect program team. I'm also part of a company called Oxentia, which provides some of the program management for Aspect. And I'm delighted to be chairing this session today on the business engagement deep dive projects. Now I'm going to pop up my slides now. Let's see how this goes and set the scene a little bit, give a little background to what we're going to be talking about and what these projects are about. So bear with me while I make that happen. This one. Okay. Now, I'm going to just ask the panelists if any of them can nod and tell me whether or not they see slides. Yes, great. Okay, fantastic. Great. So, as I was saying, we've got some great talks coming up with something called the Business Engagement Sector Deep Dive Project Leads. This is actually a session in two parts, or three, if you will. In part one, we're going to hear from some of the project team members about the work that they've been doing. We have 4 talks, and then we're going to have a little bit of a Q&A panel at the end. In the second part, starting at 11, we're going to have an interactive session, and we're going to invite you, the audience, to participate with us in exploring some of the insights and findings that have been coming out of these Aspect projects. And we hope to get a good 20-minute chat going at that point, and we'll be asking you for your ideas and your input at that time. That is why we have chosen this meeting room format for the talk today. What that means is you'll have the opportunity to kind of speak directly to the panelists later and really engage. What that means for now is that we just want to make sure everybody keeps yourself on mute during the talks. We will be taking questions, but we're going to be kind of pulling them all together, running through them at the end. So we would ask you to pull up your chat box and pop any questions you have into the chat box as we go. We'll be compiling those in the background, pulling those together for the panelists, and we'll have a really great Q&A session at the end. The one other thing I wanted to mention to you before we introduce the content here is that when you join this session on the website, you had the option to join via YouTube or Zoom. If you've joined on YouTube, it means you won't be able to interact with us. So if you go back to the conference webpage, you'll see that there is also an option to click the join in button, which will bring you into this Zoom session where you can chat with the panelists and engage with us during the session. So please do that if you have a chance. And apologies, I've got 2 cameras, 2 screens, so I'm moving back and forth here, but hopefully that's not too disconcerting. Right, so what I wanted to just start with before we come to our speakers is I wanted to tell you what are these business engagement sector deep dive projects. Now, for those of you who joined the plenary, the opening session this morning with Julia Black, she will have mentioned the Aspect program and all of the things that we have been doing during the last 3 years of this funded project. If you haven't heard, Aspect is a consortium of now 21 universities who are working together to develop insights and good practice, raise awareness, and promote the value of social sciences, innovation, and now even more than social sciences, arts, humanities, and the SHAPE agenda. So one of the ways in which Aspect has done that is it funded a series of different projects, including what you can see up there on the screen as of last year, 16 collaborative funded projects. The business engagement deep dive, where the little arrow is down in the bottom, was one of those projects that was funded by the Aspect program. Now, this screenshot that you're looking at comes from a report that the Aspect Consortium authors every year. There's a link to last year's report on the screen. And next year, this summer, there will be another one that you can also take a look at. So Aspect funded these deep dive projects. There are 4 of them that are exploring good practice related to academic and industry engagement in the social sciences. And we've picked 4 sectors, not because these are the only sectors, where social sciences has value, but because we felt it was important to focus on a few rather than spread ourselves too thin. You can see from the list of sectors up there, creative industries, fintech, legal tech, and health tech, that they each had a lead or a couple leads from the Aspect member institutions. Those are the people you're going to be hearing from today. Each project took a slightly different approach. Many of them involved workshops, interviews, surveys, and research, and engaging both with the academic and business community to gather those insights. There's going to be a lot of great outputs coming from these projects. And what I would encourage you to do is to keep coming back to the website. The Aspect website will be posting more insights soon. There's a section of all those funded projects. There will also be another learning report coming later in the summer. And you can also check out the project pages, or even if you take a snapshot of this link here, and I can probably add it into the chat box later, you can sign up for the newsletter and Aspect will keep you posted on what's coming. So that is my quick introduction. And with that, I'm going to pause for a minute here, and I'm going to hand control over to our first speaker, Professor John Beaverstock from the University of Bristol, who is going to be telling us a little bit about the FinTech deep dive that he was involved in. Now, John, let's see if this works. Do you have control?
Not yet, Britta. Yes, I have control.
Great.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending today. So my name is John Beaverstock and I'm representing the team from the University of Bristol and the University of Glasgow. We focused on improving university engagement through the social sciences with the FinTech community. And this is the team. Dominic and Helen and Gordon from the University of Glasgow, and myself and Ruth from the University of Bristol. We are a mix of academics and research, innovation, development specialists. And essentially we adopted an approach which interviewed and drawled conclusions using a workshop from a community of fintech organisations and academics in Scotland and in the southwest of England, particularly through the Bristol Bath City region. And with the interviews, we were, focusing primarily on the role of social sciences in facilitating impactful engagement with fintech organisations. And that obviously began to dig deep into the opportunities and the challenges for the social sciences. And also, which was what was quite important in our sort of methodology, was to engage with, two significant regional fintech networks, Fintech Scotland and Fintech West. And we were fortunate enough to have representatives from both of those organisations attending the workshop, but also being interviewed and developing quite a deep relationship with us in terms of helping us through this project. In terms of outputs to date, from the interviews, the transcripts from the different fintech stakeholders, the academics, and Fintech Scotland and Fintech West, we've developed 4 video voices about the challenges and opportunities for the social sciences for engaging with fintech. And we've also recently had a workshop with fintech stakeholders and academics and our colleagues from Fintech Scotland and Fintech West, where we explored the themes around the interviews. And essentially we were looking at, themes like curriculum development and talent development. We were looking at connections and connectivity and how you develop and sustain relationships between fintech organizations and universities and vice versa. And we were also, looking at, what are the next steps? What can be the big projects which can facilitate meaningful engagement between social sciences and fintechs and their stakeholders as well. And in the chat box, there'll be one exemplar of a video which you can watch at your leisure, which really does, in a 4-minute video, it just gets right to the guts of the opportunities for the social sciences in the fintech sector, what the social sciences can contribute, and also some of the challenges around those contributions. So what have we learned so far? Well, I think we've learned that there are so many opportunities, but linked to those opportunities, there are some challenges, which I think sets us forward for thinking about how we can solve and help us work through these challenges in order to develop the relationships in a meaningful way. I think in terms of the opportunities, the first one really focuses on the potential collaborations through curriculum, employability, and also, it's effectively the production of talent and the training of talent, upskilling, the way in which the social sciences can contribute to education and the future workforce in fintech. And both universities, the University of Glasgow, the University of Bristol, have MSc fintech programs in train, and these are significantly successful. But for the curriculum, I think one of the challenges was that these stakeholders suggested that fintech is moving so fastly in the market that perhaps the curriculum can't keep up with the innovation. So that's something that we have to think through how we can be more agile to do that. I think the main opportunity that the fintechs identified was the breadth and the depth of the social sciences. Rather like the tip of the iceberg, underneath the iceberg, there is so much that social sciences can offer with respect to the future development of fintech, around things like, behavioral sciences, economic behavior, the role of digital marketing, entrepreneurship, data analytics from a social sciences perspective, but also issues around, trust, risk, and ethics. That was very much important when you understand that, fintech is all about taking the financial product into the hands of the consumer. I think other opportunities rested around the fact that universities have the infrastructure for co-working, for co-design, in actually, developing future projects, research initiatives, curriculum initiatives in co-production with fintech. So we have all of the tools in the toolbox, but it's a case of moving into a situation where that can be done in a efficient manner. Of course, the other opportunities are around what the social sciences can offer in terms of facilitating intellectual property, incubators and accelerators. And of course, when we think about curriculum, the stakeholders actually identified the role that universities can play with respect to PhDs and higher degrees with respect to working in co-production with the fintech organizations. And I think what is significant about the social sciences and the opportunities is that both Fintech Scotland and Fintech West, noted that, universities and the social sciences have such a crucial role to play, with respect to developing meaningful engagement and outcomes with Fintech organizations. I think with respect to, the major challenges, I think there were two. There's a list there, but I think that there were three that really leapt out. One was the fact that, universities are large, bureaucratic, hierarchical, complex organizations, and there's red tape, and, who do you go to contact if you want to work, with a university? Where is the central contact point? And I think what is challenging for the universities is actually the social sciences being more proactive in actually putting in the shop window in showcasing, the great work that the social sciences does and how the social sciences can transfer that, as it were, to the market and be attractive to the market. And I think also one of the challenges that was identified by the fintech stakeholders was the fact that universities are very complex organizations, and it is difficult to sort of get through that complexity. So the action points then, so far of what we've identified is, first do more to identify central contact points in universities for fintechs. Try to cut red tape, but of course, this is a structural issue. Have more agility in educational offerings. So education offerings can in fact follow the market and be responsive to the needs of fintech. Showcasing the social sciences in the shop window, and also, being available for these particular organizations, through those contacts. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Britta. Thank you everyone for listening. And thank you for all the work from the University of Bristol and the University of Glasgow team.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I am going to now turn over to our next speaker, Alex Riley from the University of Manchester. Let's see if I can give you control, Alex. There you go.
I'll just give it a try. Yeah, that working. Okay. Thank you, Britta, and thank you, John. So yes, my name's Alex Riley. I'm the aspect broker for Manchester. So I'm just going to talk to you today about the Legaltech deep dive. This was a collaboration between Manchester and LSE. On the Manchester side, there was myself, Rachel Kenyon, John Haskell, and Claire McWooley. And on the LSE side, there was Horatio Mortimer and Mark Lewis. So just to give you a brief run through of what I'm going to be talking about, I'll start off by giving you some background on Legaltech. Then I'll move on to just taking you through the two case study reports that's on Manchester and then on LSE. And then I'm just going to close off by giving you some recommendations taken from the good practice guide that we wrote, drawing on insights from the report. Yes. Okay. So why Legaltech? So the team, we settled on this because we feel it's a really kind of fast-moving and high-growth area. That's there's a lot of, and there is a lot of scope for really interesting and important engagement here between industry and academia. And what is Legaltech? So there's no universal or precise definition. Just as there's no sort of universal terminology. Some people say Legaltech, some people say Lawtech. To give you a really very brief definition, so Legaltech refers generally to the application of new digital technology to increase the efficiency of the provision of legal services. So technologies like AI, machine learning, blockchain, and applications that I'm sure you all have heard of, like smart contracts are a good example. So the two case studies, I consider them complementary, and they kind of provide snapshots of business engagement at different stages. So Manchester is quite kind of an advanced stage where we've got this initiative called the Law and Technology Initiative that we set up, and I'll be taking you through that. LSE, it's more like early stage activity, but I think it's all the more interesting for that in terms of generating interesting insights on developing business engagement in this area. Okay, sorry. There we go. Sorry, there's a bit of lag there. So the Manchester case study, as I mentioned, it's the Law and Technology Initiative. So this was set up in 2018. It's kind of a first of its kind industry academia collaboration, bringing together a number of legal services firms, which you can see on the side of the screen there, and academics from the social sciences and computer sciences. So its main aim is to publish research and create curriculum content that's both academically interesting and useful for students, but as well as being highly pertinent to the legal sector. Just to give you some example of focus areas for social science research, there's been research looking at business structures, culture, decision-making, all in the context of law and technology. The idea for the initiative arose in 2017. There was already some early stage activity, and the Manchester BE team, and especially Rachel Kenyon, who did a lot of work on this area, they identified an appetite both among academics who were already kind of doing work on this, and also among law firms wanting to explore the impacts of increasing digitization of legal services. So from here, they built on that kind of appetite, and they sort of liaised with their colleagues working in other areas in business engagement. And from that, they came up with the idea of launching this consortium model, kind of funded by member fees of the legal firms that participate. So a key to the success of the initiative is that the business partners are very highly involved from the beginning. This makes sure that the initiative isn't just beneficial to us at the university in terms of like research and teaching, but it's aligned with the aims and interests of the legal firms that are participating, as well as just the legal sector more generally. So there have been a number of impacts to date, received endorsement from government ministers, the Law Society, Ministry of Justice. Other impacts include we've had experts from law firms coming in to deliver lectures. We've been able to provide opportunities for students to complete research projects for member firms. We've introduced a module aimed at undergraduates and masters and LLM students called the Law and Technology and Money module, and that's been really well received. We are positioning ourselves to bid for major funding streams, such as the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund. Yes, so that's the Manchester case study. The LSE case study, as I mentioned, it's kind of both a complement and a contrast. So it's an example of early stage activity, and Horatio and Mark, basically they conducted a series of interviews with academics at LSE Law, and they were looking to sort of ascertain sort of appetite and also to get a sense of existing activity and the lay of the land from which to sort of build on for further activity. So it was quite exploratory, but really interesting for that reason. So they found that there was a strong recognition amongst the academics they talked to that law tech and reg tech are really important for the future of law. And they also think that it's important for the curriculum going forward. So from this, they identified two platforms from which to kind of build on from this kind of appetite that they've ascertained. One is the LSE Law, Technology and Society Initiative. That's kind of a group bringing together law tech practitioners with the aim of developing further collaboration. And the other is the LSE's own innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. So from this, we had a kind of collaborative workshop where we discussed the two reports, and we sort of came up with a number of recommendations on developing effective legal tech business engagement that we put into what we call the Good Practice Guide, which will be released, I believe, at the end of maybe next month. So we came up with three kind of high level recommendations that we kind of distilled all the material into. So the first is to, if you are someone in business engagement or an academic interested in building up this activity, is to maybe start with leading with academic engagement. So like LSE did, maybe conduct a series of interviews get a sense of what activity there is, already, what interest there is among academics. And this will sort of create a kind of foundation that you can build from. From there, we recommend that you develop an early stage business engagement strategy. So take that academic engagement, maybe build on it by getting a sense of interest from industry in a collaboration, and then sort of maybe try and bring stakeholders together and establish a model going forwards to structure a future collaboration. So this recommendation we had in mind kind of the decision on Manchester's side to create a self-funded consortium model for LATI, but obviously it's not a one-size-fits-all process. So it's really a question of that strategy of bringing together stakeholders and ascertaining what model fits best. The third is maybe more of a reflection than a recommendation, but just because of the speed and just the scale of disruption that new technologies are having on the legal services industry, just how rapid the pace of change is. We say in the guide that we recommend that maybe BE teams and technology transfer officers maybe take a bit more of a proactive role rather than a more reactive one, simply because things are moving too quickly for us to just wait for academic research to catch up. So yes, overall, that's the recommendations we had, and that's the case study. I hope you found that interesting, and I'll be available in the unconference section of this session to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex. Very interesting. And I've already had one question come through, which we will hold till the end. But if you do have questions for John or Alex or any of the speakers that are coming up, do keep adding those to the chat box, and we'll bring them into the panel discussion at the end. So next up, we have Dr. Rachel Rahman from Aberystwyth University. Rachel, are you here with us? Are you ready to share? Great. Hi, Rachel. Great. Hang on one moment while I give you control.
There we go. It's come through to me. Thank you, Britta. So thanks, everyone. So I'm Dr. Rachel Rahman from Aberystwyth University. I'm a psychologist there. And so we were leading the Healthtech deep dive. So Laura was part of the team as our Senior Development Business Officer, and Dave, who's also with us today, worked with us as a research assistant to support some of the data collection and analysis. And we also worked with Gatehouse, who are that we use as consultants. So they are quite familiar with working within health tech and pharma. So they also supported us with some of the identification of key partners to talk to, and in supporting some of those qualitative approaches. So the aim of what we wanted to really try and achieve with this deep dive was to get a better understanding of how the health technology industry and social science academia really understood one another, to learn from examples of good practice in terms of collaboration, and to really try and understand where there might be barriers to engaging social science researchers in health tech, but also vice versa to engaging health tech in terms of social science research. So the approach that we decided to take, we were one of the last deep dives to get going within this programme, and so we had quite a tight time frame to run this. So we started in March, and so we needed to finish until now. So we decided to go with an open-ended survey to try and get some broad views from academia and from industry, and really trying to explore some of those questions around people's perceptions of one another in terms of their views of, I'm moving through unexpectedly here. I think I've lost control of the screens. Else. Oh, there we go. So in terms of some of the so we shared that survey, trying to explore some of those collaborations out to the Aspect network via our university partners, Gatehouse networks, and being in Wales, we also went through some of our Welsh Government innovation leads who had access out to health technology companies too. And then we also balanced this with some in-depth interviews where we wanted to try and develop some exemplary case studies. So we were exploring individuals and partnerships that had already worked in successful collaborations. So these included sometimes pairings of an academic partner and an industry partner that we interviewed separately to get each other's perspectives, or on occasions it was an implementation partner, so an NHS health service in partnership as part of that collaboration. And so we looked at those both in terms of individual interviews, but also then as those kind of potential pairings or partnerships as exemplar case studies. Unfortunately, with the timeframes, the open-ended survey didn't really yield the number of responses that we were hoping for. So we only had 7 responses to that. But I think actually when we see some of the findings, it kind of echoes some of the challenges around identifying the right kind of people, engaging people in research opportunities. And we still had some quite good insightful findings from that married with the qualitative responses. So we did those kind of 10 in-depth interviews in the end that made up those 5 exemplars. So some of the key survey insights that we had was this agreement across both partners that social science research has a valuable role to play in the health tech industry. So there was mutual agreement about that. And there was a feeling that this was valuable along the whole pathway from product development and design right through to end user engagement and evaluation. Interestingly, through the surveys, there was very little that came across in terms of the benefits for academics in terms of that ability to have applied impact in terms of research. It was very much focused on the benefits that it would serve the health industry, which is quite an interesting thing, I think. The other thing that came across quite interestingly was that each party felt that their own discipline was viewed negatively by the other. And so from an academic point of view, there was a feeling that social science was potentially viewed as less rigorous or credible in comparison to hard scientists, and that the health tech industry preferred to work with hard science. Whereas on the health tech industry, there was a feeling that actually academia found them academically dull and more money focused, and so it wasn't appealing to potentially work with them. But none of those perceptions came across from the actual partners. So this was very much a perception that came from each other. And there was a feeling that coming through the data that actually a lot of this was because of a lack of opportunity to be in shared space together. So there wasn't necessarily good understanding of how each other viewed the benefits of working together, what kind of opportunities or chances to really discover mutual interests together. And that also featured in terms of some of these collaborative opportunities, so sourcing funding to do these kind of projects was felt to be challenging, particularly for small companies who might not have an R&D budget to be able to commission academic research. And then from an academic perspective, there was a feeling that there weren't adequate funding streams that would support engagement with this kind of research, potentially when there was high risk involved with those projects. From the interview and case studies that we looked at, again, this kind of feeling of mutual benefit of working in collaboration came through recognition of academia sometimes having better access to end stakeholders, but from an industry perspective, they opened up opportunity to larger sample sizes and being able to normalise and utilise kind of theoretical data. There was also an appreciation that working together increase the potential skill sets in the collaborative team, but also from an industry perspective, was seen to have this academic angle provided them with more rigour and credibility in their products to be able to improve their marketing ability. But there were challenges with these collaborations, so there was a recognition that often there were different expectations coming into a project, and there wasn't always an understanding of what each other's expectations were. Recognition, as we've heard in some of the other deep dives, that governance structures or funding processes were very different between industry and academia, and so sometimes there was a mismatch there and hurdles to try and get over. Again, accessing funding came up as a challenge, There was some discussion around whose responsibility it was to drive the need for this collaboration. And quite often there was discussion that actually neither academia nor industry necessarily had to be collaborating. And it was often not until there was an end stakeholder, like a health board or something, pushing for that collaboration to happen that this came to the fore. Again, there was this lack of understanding sometimes of each other's needs or values, timescales in particular in terms of how quickly research needed to happen, that didn't always match the kind of long-term rigor that academic research also often has. But in terms of facilitators, amongst those that were really effective collaborations, consistently that came through was this need for, or that the team often had really effective communication, and they built up really good relationships and trust amongst one another. And so they were able through that to really navigate some of those challenges around mutual expectations and needs, so that there was agreed buy-in for what each partner was going to get out of that project. And there was an agreement, there was really need for that buy-in. So collaborations tended not to work if one partner was in it for the sole purpose of a successful project, but weren't really committed to the end product or the health application at the end of it. So there was a real need for that. And often, again, these kind of advocates were often those end users were really pushing for these kind of agreements to be in place. I've got a So in terms of the timing of the research, although there was recognitions that it was useful to have social science engagement all through the product development, often earlier collaborations were seen to develop these longer, more fruitful relationships, and so there was a felt that that was a benefit. And COVID-19 came through strongly. So in the health industry, there was a real feel that this had been a catalyst. Actually, it had increased funding opportunities that weren't previously available. The drive to collaborate for this kind of shared social goods came through strongly. And again, these kind of stakeholders really calling for rigorous and tested evaluations around health technologies that could be implemented, driving some of these collaborations. Interestingly, though, this idea that no one size fits all from these exemplars was evident. So actually, through the exemplars, there were very different health tech applications. There were different funding sources. Projects were initiated by different partners. The size, the scope, all varied, which is quite good news in terms of the ability for these projects to work effectively, regardless of the nature of those collaborations. From that, our key recommendations were a real need to implement and lobby for more appropriate funding opportunities that drive the need for social science and technology to work together, and real need for mechanisms to improve engagement between the health tech industry and academia, to be able to find the right collaborators, have a better understanding of what each other are offering. And finally then, this idea of really promoting early engagement and collaboration through a better understanding of the ideas and opportunities of how things can, or how collaborators can work together, whether that be sharing of repository of case studies or real proactive following up of early relationships to ensure that those can be built into more productive collaborations later on. And I just want to finish off by thanking Gatehouse in particular for their support in this, but also York University, who also were key to helping us to identify some of those key. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rachel. So again, just to the audience, do continue to add your questions to the chat box, and we will pick those up at the end. We have one last speaker who I think has joined us. Sam, are you here? Sam Stocky-Patel?
Yeah, I am. Apologies for joining late.
There he is. All right, Sam, I'm going to give you control of the screen, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. I've missed the technical rehearsal due to a prior engagement, so hopefully there are no there are no issues with this. Let me just check that I can change slides. Yes, I can. Excellent. Okay, so thanks for inviting me to talk to you this morning. I'm Sam Stockley-Patel. I'm a researcher at the University of York, working on one of the UKRI AHRC Creative Industries Clusters Programme projects called XR Stories. My Aspect project was completed with Alicia Rouverol, who's not here, at Creative Manchester, which is part of the University of Manchester, and it explored the ways in which social sciences academics engage with creative industries organisations, and the value, challenges, and kind of general dynamics of such engagements. The data which supports our reports comes from interviews with 46 informants. Of those, 26 were academics working at universities in either the kind of Yorkshire or Manchester regions, and 20 were with kind of creative industries professionals working both in and also beyond our regions. You can see there the coverage of kind of creative industries subsectors that we spoke to. So we're able to kind of capture a really kind of a broad range of the creative industries, even though we had relatively limited numbers of interviews. So each of the areas of focus within our reports includes a kind of lengthier discussion, which is supported by the interview data and also a kind of 2 or 3 key ideas. And so today I'm going to give you a flavour of our reports just by highlighting one key insight from 4 of our key areas as named there. So the first key area is establishing partnerships, and this looks at the ways in which engagement relationships are formed and managed. The first key finding is that forming new partnerships almost always involved the pre-existing personal and sometimes professional networks of individual academics. A couple of quotes here. The first from an academic who says that from the partnered research I've conducted, there's a consistent theme, and that is that you're drawing on the people that you know. And the second from an industry informant who says trust is fundamentally important. There's something about having other people in the room who are not participating that can feel really uncomfortable. So there's a trust that's built up first. So we found that researchers with existing sector ties are much more likely to take part in sector engaged research. So we also found that the relationship building which underpins engagement was often taking place outside of workplaces and also kind of outside of work time during kind of industry events, for example. Now there's a lot of literature about the kind of social and cultural realms of the creative industries, how they're embedded within cities and the kind of relational bonds between individuals and firms within a region. And our findings around the kind of role of events and kind of personal connections really speaks to that kind of well-evidenced kind of dynamic. So a real challenge with this kind of network-driven model of engagement brokering is that it's particularly difficult for some academics. So for instance, those with heavier teaching loads. And academics tended to agree that this kind of reliance on social capital and kind of extracurricular networking was a kind of extension of wider inequities within academia. So our kind of best practice suggestion for this is that schools or departments keep kind of abreast of the kind of sector connections across their staff in order to kind of accelerate and ease the kind of relationship building process, and also in a more general sense, just to ensure that the time it takes to kind of broker and sustain sector relationships are kind of firstly allocated and also secondly valued. So the next area is partnership infrastructure, and this looks at the various mechanisms by which universities have tried to support kind of creative industries engagement and the extent to which the academics we spoke to utilize things like business engagement officers, for example. So key finding number 2 is that we find that kind of institutional intermediation has a more prominent role to play when kind of larger scale partnerships are being formed with kind of bigger creative industries organizations. So whilst kind of individual relationships between individual stakeholders remains really important for kind of the research phase itself, sustained engagement often requires kind of wider support and resources. So a couple of indicative quotes here, short ones, so I won't bother reading them. One from an academic and another from industry. So the academic quote really makes clear this kind of issue of scale. And the sector informant makes it clear that they have this kind of long-standing relationship with the university itself, and that it's very much about kind of two institutions working together. So basically bigger creative industries organizations who sometimes have kind of dedicated partnership teams are building longer term and much larger scale partnerships with universities at the institutional level. And it was common that such partnerships would be multifaceted, so including things like co-funded and co-mentored PhD students, regular research workshops, and other kinds of engagement activities that added value in a variety of ways. And in those cases, a kind of university level infrastructure was really well placed to oversee and manage and administer the various stakeholders. But a real challenge here is a kind of common concern that formalizing the kind of relationship building process through a kind of university intermediary would be to the detriment of the kind of personal connections, which have been reflected upon as being so crucial for impactful engagement. And the best practice solution here really is the amount of support required for any given partnership should be responsive to the needs of stakeholders, and that those needs may change over time. I've been given a 1-minute warning, so I'm going to skip ahead to a slightly more interesting section. Let's skip language and outputs and go to added value. And this looks at the ways in which research engagement adds value to both the creative industries and also HE partners. So academic research provides organizations with both applied evidence and data that's useful in the short term, and also with kind of prospective insights with kind of longer term gains. So a couple of quotes here. So the first from an academic who does research on policy problems, who makes looking, for example, at inequality in the creative industries and changing organizational practices as a result. And the second from an industry informant who asked an academic to do research about decolonizing their canon, recognizing that their audience was aging, that they had to tell different types of stories. So academic expertise and repute were used to kind of support organizational change and to evaluate performance with the kind of creative industry's own stakeholders, often the audience for such work. But beyond this, kind of social sciences research has also added value in kind of less explicit or immediately tangible ways through kind of critical and entrepreneurial thinking, which can be useful in the kind of mid to long term. So best practice here really is that it's clear that engagement between social scientists and the creative industry sector isn't necessarily about either kind of shorter term and output driven value or longer term and more prospective or exploratory value in terms of impact, but that both are achievable when sufficient institutional and kind of organizational support exists. There we go. That's everything. That's a real whistle-stop tour through just some of the findings in our reports, which will be on the Aspect website shortly. There's 25,000 words of stuff to read if that's your bag, or there are some more kind of brief, concise, summative pieces too. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. That's fantastic. And sorry, it's always tough when you're the last one, you get shorted sometime on the time. So thank you for kind of taking us on that whistle-stop tour.
No problem, thank you.
So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and get our panelists up on the screen because we still have a little bit of time for some Q&A. Let's see, we've got you all here. We've got John, Rachel, Sam, Alex, and we're also joined by a few other members of the teams. We have Gordon up there, well, he's on the right in my screen, David from Aberystwyth, and Adam Winship from Manchester University as well. So other members of the project team joining us for this Q&A. So we've got a few questions in the chat box. Before we get to those, I just want to kick off with a question to you all, which is that first reflection, the good news that I heard from all of you is that there is a perception that social science research is valued in each of these sectors. So that is great news. also some common themes about how we can build those relationships and support them as people who work within universities in those roles. What I was curious to hear was, some of the recommendations, some of the thoughts, some of the reflections you heard. I wondered how different those were from any other academic discipline if we were trying to encourage that engagement. So I wondered if any of you could comment on what you found might be unique about business academic relationship building in your sectors or in the social sciences on either side. Is anybody able to comment on that? Sam, go ahead.
I'm happy to. As I seeded in the very quick presentation, it was definitely the case for the creative industries that academics were meeting up with sector outside of work. So I have people who were literally going to the pub or to cafes to talk about potential research projects and then building a relationship that way. So there's a kind of a creative city rhetoric about how the creative industries engage with each other, and it was kind of common that academics would have to kind of fall into that wider kind of social and cultural milieu in order to build kind of research partnerships too. So academics literally leaving university campuses and going to coffee shops and bars and opening nights at galleries and so on in order to meet people and get to know the sector.
Interesting. And John, did you want to come in on that too?
Yes, I think with the results that we found in the Fintech project, one of the more meaningful short-term relationship building exercises for the social sciences really focused around the development of curriculum in co-production with these Fintech organizations. And that was a very tangible aspect, and also examples of students going on placements or internships and so on. So a way of sort of seed corning future relationships in other ways. So that was quite significant for fintechs.
Thank you. Oh, Rachel, yes.
I was just going to add, I think from a health tech perspective, what struck me as really interesting was our own perception of social science and this view that actually in the medical arena, perhaps we weren't the academics that health tech wanted to be working with, and that really wasn't the case from the health tech. And so I think there's lessons learned there as well in terms of how we perceive our own discipline.
Oh, that's a good point. This kind of, in a way, this question leads on to, this conversation leads on to one of the questions that came through in the chat box from Sheena. This was pointed at you, Alex, which was, you mentioned your final recommendation was for business engagement to be more proactive due to the pace of change. What can you advise? What types of activities or interventions do you think would be most effective?
Yeah, thanks, Sheena. Yeah, good question. So this is something that I think the Good Practice Guide touches on a little bit more. So definitely recommend giving that a look when it comes out if you're interested. But yeah, just to touch on that for now. So I would say in terms of like recommendations for taking a more proactive approach. So one example would be, for example, in Manchester's case, we found that there was, pre-existing collaborations between academics and the legal industry. So we'd recommend maybe where you don't find this at your own industry, at your own institution, where you don't see, for example, like oven-ready collaborations or existing sector partnerships, of maybe approaching law firms directly and say, we're interested in collaboration. What are you interested in? What are your needs? How can we help? That sort of thing.
Thanks, Alex. Anybody else want to comment on that in terms of the types of interventions you're seeing that can help proactively encourage business engagement?
Potentially, sorry, go ahead, Rachel.
I suppose the one thing that came across through some of with us was this call for more shared space, so opportunity where we were in the same space together, whether that be through webinars or matchmaking type of workshops and things where actually there was a chance for those really early discussions to happen and those relationships to start to develop.
And I was just going to say that there's, in general, the role of kind of university intermediation, so kind of knowledge transfer officers or business engagement teams, was very underutilized in terms of engaging with the creative industries. And anecdotally, in trying to find academics to contribute to this work, my first port of call was the kind of the more business-facing aspects of the university, who I hoped would know which academics had engaged in this way. And I find that they didn't really know, actually, and I'm not sure that's really an answer to the question so much as highlighting the challenge that we have, that maybe for the creative industries, there hasn't been a particularly proactive kind of managing of relationships beyond the academy to date, with the exception of something called the Cultural Institute at the University of Leeds, which was spoken about as having a pracademic, which is a practical and academic kind of role to play, and having one foot in each camp. And so they were cited as being a useful kind of broker of relationships within and beyond the university. And so that might be a model that could be rolled out to other unis too.
Academic, love it. We had a question from Adam, actually. Adam, given that you are here in the room, I wondered if you wanted to ask your question directly to the panel.
Yeah, that's fine. Well, it was more specifically to Alex, really, but I'm happy to kind of broaden it out to the FinTech group. Is there any kind of, obviously Alex highlighted the University of Manchester and LSE and how kind of successful they've been. I just wondered if there are any other institutions that were kind of looking at this kind of theme, if you like, or subject area.
So as you mentioned, Adam, we were mainly focusing on LSE and Manchester, but I think definitely getting a better picture of what's going on at universities across the UK in terms of legal activity would be a really interesting area for follow-up and future activity. Yeah.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And can I just say on a personal level, I think Alex did a really good job, and he kind of joined our team at Manchester. And then 2 weeks later, we went into lockdown. So he's basically been having to learn all this just on his own in his room. So well done.
Thank you.
Very used to just doing things, via screen. So this is.
I would echo that. Alex also supported our project, and
yeah, of course.
Likewise, was fantastic. Right.
Thank you.
Well, we're coming up to the end of this first part of the session. We do have one last comment. I wonder if we could squeeze it in. It's a comment from Jane to Sam. Jane, are you here in the room? Did you want to make your comment directly to Sam?
Hi, Britta. I don't know if you can see or hear me yet.
Hi. Yes. Hi.
Brilliant. Yeah. No, it was just to very gently challenge Sam's suggestion about how business engagement professionals are better suited to working with larger organizations. And I think, well, that often is the case, and that, greater university input is required with those organizations. I'd also wanted to fly the flag for those of us who have successfully worked with SMEs and with even micro businesses. And I think sometimes those smaller, maybe more tentative organizations need a little bit more nurturing as well. And actually that can have really, really good success.
Sure. Gentle provocation, welcome, as is more robust provocation. So that's absolutely fine. No, yeah, I think it's about saying that university intermediation is kind of particularly useful for not only larger creative industries organizations, but also larger partnerships that might last for 10 years. For instance, there are many reasons for that. One of them, off the top of my head, is kind of academic job precarity and short-term contracts. There's not much point in an organization that wants to engage for many years building a relationship with an individual academic if that academic is going to be gone in 12 months time. So there's a good role for a business engagement team there. But in general, it tended to be the case that the level of trust that was required between the social scientist and the company meant that a direct relationship was needed rather than one that was brokered by a business engagement team. So for instance, if the academic's going in and asking questions about the employment practices and issues regarding diversity, then knowing and trusting the individual academic asking those questions was extremely important. So it's about a bit of both, I think, and it's about a responsive business engagement kind of model, I think, according to stakeholder need and requirement.
Brilliant, thanks. Yeah, I'd agree.
Thank you, Sam and Jane. Well, This hour has just flown by. We, believe it or not, are at the end of our first hour, and we're about to move on to the second part of this session, which is the opportunity for a bit more interaction. So if you did have questions you wanted to post to the group or discuss further, we can actually still do that, just in a slightly different format as we move on to the second half, the second part, the last half hour, I guess, of this morning business engagement deep dive sector. I have seen a few people have been joining us over the course of the last hour. For those who have come in and maybe missed the introduction, I'd just like to make a few comments. One is that you can be viewing this session either on YouTube or via Zoom. You had the option to choose one or the other when you joined. For this part of the session, you really need to join via Zoom. You won't be able to interact if you have clicked that YouTube link. And in fact, you will just basically see an empty meeting room because we will be using the breakout room function for this next 20 to 30 minutes. So if you have joined on YouTube, just go back to the conference webpage and click the join in button where you'll be invited to join via Zoom and see us here in this room. The second thing to mention or to reiterate, as I said at the top of the hour on this session, the speakers who shared their talks with us today, all of them mentioned outputs and resources and reports. There's some great media, some great reports, some insights that have come out of the work they've all been working so hard on over the last year. Those will be posted on the Aspect website as they become available any day now and over the course of the next month. So keep coming back to the Aspect website. You can also register for the Aspect newsletter on the website, and you'll be kept informed as things are posted and become available.